Hi. In this video, we want to show how to generate a PDF with tabular data and download the file from an InVision workbook. As an example, we have a list of projects, and we want users to be able to get a timesheet report in PDF format for each project. In the InVision Designer, I have set up a workbook with a simple table listing the projects. I've added a context menu to the project name column, so users can choose which project to generate a PDF for. Back in the Workbook Designer, I'm handling the Custom Context Menu Action Executed event, which triggers when a user clicks Download Timesheet in the context menu. In the event handler, I execute a flow named Demo, Generate PDF with Tabular Data, which generates a PDF and returns it to me. I will show how to build this flow in a moment. Because I will be building a flow that returns a file that I want to download in the browser, I must use the Download API to run the flow. I also need to pass in a payload containing the project ID of the project that the user clicks, so I can generate the PDF for that specific project. Now let's switch to the Flow Designer to build our flow. I'll start by quickly adding all the actions we will use, and then go back and fill in the details. The first thing I do is add an HTTP trigger, which makes it easy to run the flow from an HTTP request. I then add 2 SQL Server actions to load the timesheet data and additional project information from my database. I then add a function which I will use to dynamically generate an HTML document for the timesheet, and then add an Adobe PDF Services action that converts the HTML to a PDF document. Finally, I'll add the return file HTTP response action to return the file back to the caller in a proper file format for HTTP requests. Now, let's start filling in the details for each action. The first thing I need to do is define the data contract for the request. We need to know which project to use, so we must define a data contract that contains the project ID. Remember that we passed in the project ID from the context menu event handler earlier in the video. To define the data contract, select the flowchart background to bring up the Properties panel, and then open the Custom Data Type Editor. Here, I'll create a simple data type with a single property called Project ID, which matches the name of the property from the event handler earlier. I'll then choose my data contract as the output data type of the HTTP trigger, which makes it easy to get the project ID and the other actions in the flow. Next, I'll quickly paste the queries to the SQL Server actions. These are just standard SQL queries to retrieve data, so they're not very interesting. Note, however, that I need to pass in the project ID that I get from the HTTP trigger as a parameter to the queries. To implement our HTML generator function, we'll start by adding the parameters we need, which are the timesheet table for the project ID, and the project name. We'll then define the output from the function, which must be a byte array, because that's what the Adobe Converter action accepts as input. In my code, I'll paste the HTML generation I've prepared, so you don't have to watch me type. I want my PDF to contain a logo, so I'm inlining an SVG image. Note that I need to use the escape data string function to convert the SVG definition to a valid inline string. I can then use it in the URL CSS function to set the background image of an element. Next, I add a basic header to the page, create the table and table header, and then loop over each row in the timesheet table to generate the table body using a string builder. Finally, I convert the string to a byte array and return it from the function. Jumping over to the Adobe Converter action, I'll select HTML as the input format and choose the output from the HTML generator function as file contents. Finally, I'll configure the return file HTTP response action to return the file generated by the Adobe PDF Services API and the name of the file. I forgot to specify a connection for my SQL Server actions, so I'll quickly do that before we switch back to the workbook and try things out. So now when we click Download Timesheet for a project, we should get a PDF file with a logo that contains the timesheet in a table format. And voila, we have our PDF with a logo and everything. Thank you for watching.